The stars looked different when you were losing a war. Admiral Kethavar pressed his clawed hands against the cold metal of the observation deck aboard the Alliance flagship Eternal Dawn, and watched another world burn. The orange glow of plasma bombardment lit up the surface of Kepler-7 like a dying sun. 3 million Zephyrian civilians lived on that world yesterday. Today there might be 300,000 left alive, hiding in underground shelters that would not hold much longer against Vrak weapons. The war had been going badly for 3 solar cycles now. The Zephyrian Alliance controlled 47 star systems when the fighting started. Now they held 14, and the Vrak Dominion was advancing deeper into Alliance space every day. Their bioships moved like living nightmares through the void, organic hulls pulsing with alien life and weapons that seemed to grow stronger with each battle. Kethvar had fought in smaller conflicts before, border disputes and piracy problems that lasted a few months at most. This was different. The Vrak did not just want territory or resources. They wanted to consume everything. Their bioships literally fed on the metals and energy from destroyed vessels, growing larger and more dangerous after every victory. It was like fighting a disease that got stronger every time it infected something new. The communication console behind him chirped with another distress signal. Commander Veltar, his tactical officer, looked up from the holographic display with exhaustion clear in his large eyes. Veltar had not slept properly in 2 weeks, none of them had. When every hour might bring news of another lost colony, rest seemed like a luxury they could not afford. "Admiral, we are receiving emergency broadcasts from the Proxima defense grid," Veltar said in his quiet voice. "The Vrak have broken through the outer perimeter. They estimate 4 days before the core worlds are within bombardment range." 4 days. Kethavar felt something cold settle in his stomach that had nothing to do with the recycled air of the ship. The core worlds held 2 billion Alliance citizens. If those worlds fell, the war would be over. Not just lost, but finished completely. The Vrak would have enough biomass to fuel their expansion into the rest of the galaxy. The problem was simple enough to understand, but impossible to solve. Vrak bioships could regenerate damage faster than Alliance weapons could inflict it. Their organic armor adapted to whatever energy frequencies hit it, becoming more resistant with each shot. A Vrak ship that survived a battle was literally harder to kill the next time you fought it. Meanwhile, Alliance vessels grew weaker as they used up ammunition and spare parts that could not be replaced fast enough. Kethvar had sent his best battle groups to try to slow the Vrak advance. The results were always the same. Alliance ships would score initial hits, giving their commanders hope that maybe this time would be different. Then the bioships would adapt, their living hulls shifting and changing to deflect the attacks. Within hours, sometimes minutes, the Vrak would be winning again. Alliance fleets that might have held their own against any conventional enemy were being systematically destroyed. The worst part was how intelligent the enemy appeared to be. The Vrak did not just attack randomly. They studied Alliance tactics, learned from each encounter, and shared that knowledge across their entire fleet through some kind of biological communication network. It was like fighting an enemy that never made the same mistake twice and remembered every weakness they discovered. 3 sectors away, Captain Lisa Martinez was reviewing patrol reports aboard the human diplomatic vessel New Horizon. Humanity had only made contact with the galactic community 18 months ago, and most of that time had been spent in careful negotiations and cultural exchanges. The human ship looked tiny compared to the massive Alliance and Vrak vessels, more like a research station than a military craft. Martinez had been a Navy captain before being selected for the diplomatic mission. She understood military operations, even if her current job involved more talking than fighting. When the emergency broadcast reached her ship, she recognized immediately what she was hearing. It was not a request for help. It was a civilization crying out in its final moments. The message had been sent on open frequencies, probably hoping that someone, anyone, might respond. The Alliance was not specifically asking humanity for military assistance. They were asking the entire galaxy. Most species would ignore the broadcast. Getting involved in someone else's war was never a smart choice for a young civilization trying to establish itself. Martinez did not hesitate. She ordered her communications officer to establish a priority channel to Earth Command and began transmitting everything they had received. The message would take 6 hours to reach Earth through the hyperspace relay network, but it was the fastest way to get the information home. On Earth, Admiral Jake Thompson was reviewing construction reports for the newest human fleet when the message arrived. Thompson had spent 30 years in various military commands, from submarine warfare to space defense platforms. He was not the kind of officer who got excited about anything, but the Alliance situation made him pay attention. Humanity had been building quietly since making contact with the galaxy. Other species seemed to view humans as primitive, barely advanced enough to deserve notice. That was fine with Thompson. It gave them time to study how galactic warfare actually worked and build weapons accordingly. The human military had observed several smaller conflicts between alien species during their short time in galactic politics. Most alien warfare seemed to follow predictable patterns: energy weapons, particle shields, biotechnology, and gravitational manipulation. It was all very advanced, but it was also predictable. Human engineers had been developing countermeasures for months just in case. Thompson called an emergency meeting with Earth's military council. The Alliance had shown friendship to humanity when others remained suspicious. More importantly, if the Vrak won this war, they would eventually turn their attention to other species. Better to stop them now while they were focused elsewhere than wait for them to come looking for Earth. The decision took 4 hours of debate, but the conclusion was inevitable. 3 human dreadnoughts would deploy immediately. The ships had been built specifically for this kind of situation, incorporating everything humanity had learned about alien technology while developing their own innovations. It was time to see if human military thinking could make a difference in galactic warfare. The UES Liberty, UES Victory, and UES Defiance began their journey toward the Warzone 12 hours after the Alliance distress call reached Earth. Their crews had trained for this moment without knowing if it would ever come. Now they would discover whether human tactics could succeed where alien strategies had failed. Captain Danny Rodriguez watched the stars streak past the view screen of the UES Liberty as the human fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the war zone. The 3 human ships looked nothing like the elegant vessels he had seen in Alliance propaganda broadcasts. Where alien ships curved and flowed like works of art, human ships were angular blocks of gray metal covered in what appeared to be crude armor plating. They looked primitive, almost barbaric compared to the sleek designs favored by galactic civilization. That was exactly what Earth Command wanted. Let the aliens think humans were backwards. Let them assume human technology was simple and outdated. The truth was hidden beneath those ugly metal plates and basic-looking weapon mounts. Every system on the Liberty had been designed from scratch after studying alien warfare for 18 months. Human engineers had taken apart captured weapons, analyzed battle recordings, and interviewed every Alliance officer willing to talk about Vrak tactics. Lieutenant Amy Foster ran her hands over the tactical console, checking weapon systems one final time. The display showed green across the board, but she knew the real test would come when they faced actual combat. Everything looked good in simulations, but alien warfare was unpredictable in ways that computer models could not capture. Foster had been handpicked for this mission because of her ability to think quickly under pressure. Today would test that ability like nothing in her training. The communications array crackled to life with Alliance transmissions. Rodriguez listened as the alien voices expressed gratitude, mixed with barely concealed doubt. 3 human ships against a Vrak armada that had crushed dozens of Alliance fleets. It sounded like a suicide mission dressed up as a rescue attempt. Commander Veltar was coordinating Alliance forces from the flagship Eternal Dawn when the human vessels appeared on his sensors. The ships registered as friendly, but their design made him pause. Human technology looked so basic compared to what he was used to seeing. Their hulls were covered in simple metal armor instead of energy shields. Their weapon mounts appeared to be nothing more than large tubes pointed forward. If he had not known better, he would have assumed they were cargo haulers trying to pretend they were warships. Still, any help was welcome at this point. The Alliance had lost 6 more ships in the past 12 hours, and rock bioships were massing for what appeared to be a final assault on the core worlds. Even 3 primitive human vessels might buy enough time for civilian evacuations to be completed. Rodriguez opened a channel to the other human ships. Captain Susan Walsh commanded the UES Victory from her position on the fleet's right flank. She was a 20-year Navy veteran who had started her career on nuclear submarines and worked her way up through increasingly complex assignments. Her ship carried the most experimental weapons in the human arsenal, systems so new that some of them had never been tested outside of laboratory conditions. Captain Tony Blake aboard the UES Defiance took position on the left flank. Blake had spent his early career in explosive ordnance disposal before transferring to tactical command. He understood better than most how to make things blow up in ways that caused maximum damage to the target, while keeping friendly forces safe. His ship specialized in what human military planners called area denial weapons, designed to make large sections of space temporarily uninhabitable for enemy forces. The three human captains had trained together for months, developing coordination techniques that took advantage of their ship's unique capabilities. Unlike alien fleets that relied on individual vessel superiority, human doctrine emphasized teamwork and mutual support. Each ship covered the other's weaknesses while maximizing their combined strengths. Foster's sensors detected the approaching Vrak fleet while they were still several light minutes away. 50 bioships in a loose swarm formation, each one pulsing with organic energy that made her equipment readings fluctuate in disturbing patterns. The ships looked alive in a way that made her skin crawl. Smooth curves and flowing lines suggested something grown rather than built, and the energy signatures matched biological processes more than mechanical systems. Rodriguez studied the enemy formation through the main view screen. Intelligence reports had described Vrak bioships, but seeing them in person was different. They moved with a fluid grace that seemed almost hypnotic, like watching a school of fish or a flock of birds. There was an intelligence behind their movement patterns that went beyond simple tactical coordination. These things were not just weapons, they were living creatures that happened to be the size of space stations. The bioships had noticed the human arrival and were changing course to intercept. Their formation shifted and flowed as they approached, individual vessels taking positions that would allow them to bring maximum firepower to bear, while minimizing their exposure to return fire. It was exactly the kind of adaptive tactical thinking that made them so dangerous to fight. Alliance intelligence had warned human commanders about Vrak bioarmor. The organic hulls could adapt to whatever weapons hit them, becoming more resistant with each shot. Energy weapons that worked perfectly in the first few minutes of combat would become useless as the bioships evolved defenses. Most Alliance battles followed the same pattern. Initial success followed by gradual defeat as the enemy adapted to their tactics. Foster ran final diagnostics on the Liberty's primary weapons. Human engineers had spent months developing countermeasures for adaptive armor. The solution was elegant in its simplicity. Use weapons so different from anything the Vrak had encountered that their biological systems would not know how to adapt quickly enough. Kinetic projectiles instead of energy beams, chemical explosives instead of plasma charges, electromagnetic pulses instead of particle weapons. The human fleet had other advantages that the Alliance lacked. Human military doctrine had been developed through centuries of warfare against other humans. Every weapon, every tactic, every strategic principle had been tested in actual combat against intelligent opponents who fought back with everything they had. Alien species seemed to have developed their military technology through logical analysis and computer simulation. Humans had learned through trial and error in situations where mistakes meant death. Rodriguez gave the order to prepare for combat. The Liberty's crew moved to battle stations with practiced efficiency. Every person aboard had trained for this moment, knowing that they might be the only thing standing between the Vrak and the complete destruction of Alliance civilization. The weight of that responsibility should have been crushing, but instead it felt like purpose. This was what they had prepared for, what their ships had been built to do. The enemy was approaching fast now, bioships spreading out in attack formation. In a few minutes the battle would begin. The Vrak fleet moved through space like a living thing, 50 bioships flowing in perfect coordination toward the small human formation. Each vessel pulsed with bioluminescent patterns that seemed to communicate across the void, sharing information faster than any radio transmission. The organic hulls rippled and shifted as they prepared for combat, already beginning to adapt their armor for the energy frequencies they expected to encounter, based on previous battles with Alliance forces. Rodriguez watched the enemy approach through the Liberty's main view screen and felt a strange calm settle over him. This was the moment that 18 months of preparation had been leading toward. Every simulation, every training exercise, every late night spent studying alien battle recordings had been preparation for the next few minutes. He reached for the communication controls and opened a channel to both human ships. The bioships opened fire first, launching streams of organic projectiles that looked like living missiles. The creatures twisted through space on trails of bioluminescent exhaust, seeking heat signatures and metal concentrations that would indicate enemy vessels. Alliance intelligence had warned human commanders about these weapons. They were not just explosive devices, but actual living organisms, bred for one purpose: to find enemy ships and destroy them with biological acids that could eat through any known metal. Foster tracked the incoming bio-missiles on her tactical display and activated the Liberty's point defense systems. Instead of the energy weapons that most alien species used, human ships carried rapid-fire kinetic interceptors, simple metal projectiles fired at extremely high velocity. The biomissiles had evolved to survive energy attacks by developing heat-resistant shells and electromagnetic shielding. They had never encountered solid metal traveling at 15,000 meters per second. The interceptors shredded the organic missiles before they could reach the human ships. Pieces of biological matter scattered across space, twitching briefly before going silent. The Vrak fleet hesitated for a moment, as if surprised that their opening attack had been so easily defeated. Bioships communicated with each other through rapid flashes of colored light, sharing information about this unexpected development. Rodriguez gave the order that would change everything. All ships open fire. The UES Liberty's main guns were not energy weapons or particle beams like the Alliance used. They were railguns, electromagnetic accelerators that launched solid tungsten rods at 15% of light speed. The projectiles were simple pieces of metal with no guidance systems, no explosive warheads, no complex technology at all. Physics was their only weapon, and physics was enough. The tungsten rods struck the lead Vrak bioship before its organic sensors could even register the attack. The projectile punched through the living hull like it was made of paper, creating a massive wound that sprayed biological fluids into the vacuum. The bioship tried to seal the damage, organic tissue flowing to close the breach, but the exit wound was too large and the internal damage too severe. The creature died in seconds, its bioluminescent patterns fading to black. Captain Walsh's ship, the UES Victory, demonstrated the next innovation in human military technology. Quantum torpedoes that existed in a state of dimensional phase until the moment of impact, allowing them to pass through shields and armor without resistance. The Vrak bioships had evolved defenses against every type of energy weapon and kinetic projectile they had encountered, but they had never faced weapons that simply ignored physical barriers. The quantum torpedoes materialized inside Vrak bioships and exploded. Organic hulls that had withstood direct hits from Alliance plasma cannons were shredded from within by weapons that bypassed their defenses completely. Bioships that had seemed invincible moments before were suddenly dying faster than they could regenerate damage. Captain Blake aboard the U.S. Defiance showed why human military thinking was different from anything the galaxy had seen before. His ship fired electromagnetic pulse missiles that overloaded the nervous systems of the bioships, paralyzing them completely. The organic vessels drifted helplessly in space, unable to move or fight back, while follow-up attacks with thermite warheads created fires that burned through biological tissue faster than it could heal. The human weapons were not just effective, they were specifically designed to exploit the fundamental weaknesses of biological technology. Vrak bioships could adapt to energy attacks by changing their cellular structure, but they could not adapt to kinetic weapons that operated on basic physics. They could regenerate damage from conventional explosives, but they could not survive fires that burned hotter than their biological systems could withstand. Foster watched her tactical display as Vrak bioships died one after another. The enemy formation was dissolving into chaos, as creatures that had never experienced this kind of devastating attack tried to understand what was happening to them. Some bioships attempted to retreat, but human weapons had longer range and greater accuracy than anything they were used to facing. The battle that should have lasted hours was over in 4 minutes. 30 Vrak bioships had been destroyed or disabled, their organic hulls drifting in space like the corpses of massive sea creatures. The remaining 20 vessels were broadcasting distress signals on frequencies that Alliance sensors had never detected before, emergency calls for help in a language that sounded more like whale. song than any form of mechanical communication. Rodriguez ordered his ships to cease fire as the surviving Vrak began a panicked retreat. There was no point in pursuing them. The message had been delivered. Human weapons could destroy bioships faster than they could adapt, and human tactics could outmaneuver formations that had crushed every other opponent they had faced. Commander Veltar aboard the Alliance flagship could barely believe what his sensors were telling him. In 4 minutes, the human ships had accomplished what Alliance fleets had been unable to do in 3 years of warfare. The Vrak retreat was not a tactical withdrawal. It was a rout. Bioships that had never shown fear were fleeing as fast as their organic propulsion systems could carry them. The communication channels erupted with Alliance voices expressing amazement and gratitude. Ships that had been preparing for a final desperate battle were suddenly talking about counterattacks and reclaiming lost territory. The tide of war had not just turned, it had reversed completely. Foster ran diagnostics on the Liberty's weapons systems and found that they had used less than 10% of their ammunition reserves. The human ships were barely scratched, their primitive-looking armor having deflected the few Vrak attacks that had reached them. Against an enemy that had seemed invincible, humanity had achieved a perfect victory with minimal losses. The galaxy was about to learn that sometimes the most advanced technology could be defeated by going back to basics and applying them better than anyone thought possible. News of the human victory spread through both fleets within hours like wildfire across dry grass. Alliance communication networks that had carried nothing but defeat and retreat for 3 years suddenly buzzed with reports of an impossible victory. 30 Vrak bioships destroyed in 4 minutes by 3 primitive-looking human vessels. Officers who had watched their fleets get systematically destroyed were calling their friends on other ships to confirm that the reports were real. Commander Veltar found himself staring at sensor recordings of the battle for the 5th time, trying to understand what he had witnessed. The human weapons made no sense according to everything he knew about galactic warfare. Simple kinetic projectiles should not have been able to penetrate bioarmor that had evolved to resist the most advanced energy weapons in known space. Yet somehow the crude human railguns had punched through Vrak hulls like they were made of thin plastic. The psychological effect on Alliance forces was immediate and dramatic. Ships that had been preparing for evacuation began requesting permission to join counterattack formations. Crews that had spent months in constant retreat started volunteering for dangerous missions. The humans had proven that the Vrak could be beaten, and that changed everything about how Alliance forces viewed the war. Captain Rodriguez received a priority communication from Earth Command 6 hours after the battle ended. Admiral Thompson's weathered face appeared on the main view screen of the Liberty, and even across the vast distance of space, Rodriguez could see satisfaction in the older man's eyes. The victory had exceeded all expectations, but Thompson was already thinking about the next phase of operations. 12 more human vessels were being dispatched immediately, Thompson explained, carrying weapons specifically designed to counter every Vrak advantage that Alliance intelligence had identified. The new ships would arrive within 48 hours, giving the human fleet enough firepower to begin serious offensive operations against enemy positions that had been untouchable for years. Rodriguez found himself promoted to fleet commander as human forces took over coordination of the entire war effort. The Alliance High Command had made the decision quickly. Whoever understood how to fight the Vrak effectively should be in charge of fighting them. Human tactical thinking had accomplished in minutes what Alliance strategies had failed to achieve in years. Lieutenant Foster, now wearing the insignia of a full commander, established a tactical coordination center aboard the Liberty, where human and Alliance officers worked together to plan the counter-offensive. The cultural differences were obvious. Alliance officers thought in terms of elegant solutions and technological superiority, while humans focused on practical problems and simple answers that worked. The difference in military philosophy became clear during the first joint planning session. Alliance tactical doctrine emphasized individual ship superiority and advanced technology. They built vessels that could defeat any enemy ship in single combat, then deployed them in formations designed to maximize their individual capabilities. It was a logical approach that had worked well against every opponent they had faced before the Vrak. Human military thinking was completely different. Rodriguez and his officers thought in terms of combined arms and mutual support. They designed weapons to exploit specific enemy weaknesses. then coordinated multiple ships to attack those weaknesses simultaneously. Human fleets were more than the sum of their parts, while Alliance fleets were collections of individual powerful units. Captain Martinez, who had delivered the original distress call, now served as liaison between human and Alliance forces. Her diplomatic experience proved invaluable in bridging the gap between two very different approaches to warfare. She helped Alliance commanders understand why human tactics worked so well against enemies that seemed invincible, while explaining to human officers how to work effectively with alien crew members who thought differently about combat. The Vrak Dominion leadership was experiencing something they had never faced before: genuine panic. Their biotechnology had made them dominant for over 2 centuries, allowing them to absorb and adapt to any threat they encountered. The concept of an enemy they could not eventually defeat through biological evolution was outside their understanding of how warfare functioned. Emergency sessions of the Vrak High Command produced no solutions to the human problem. Their greatest military minds could not develop countermeasures for weapons that operated on basic physics rather than advanced technology. Bioarmor could not adapt to tungsten rods traveling at near light speed because there was nothing to adapt to. The projectiles did not use energy that could be absorbed or frequencies that could be blocked. They simply had mass and velocity, and those were unchangeable physical constants. The arriving human reinforcements brought innovations that made the situation even worse for the Vrak. Captain Blake received command of a new weapon system that his demolition expertise made him perfect to operate. Quantum mines that existed in dimensional phase until triggered by specific energy signatures, then materialized inside enemy ships and exploded. Bioships that had learned to avoid human railguns and torpedoes found themselves dying from weapons they could not detect until it was too late. Foster coordinated the deployment of these new weapons with the precision of a surgeon. Her tactical center tracked every Vrak ship in the sector and assigned specific human vessels to counter each enemy capability. Where Alliance commanders had tried to match Vrak's strength with superior firepower, Foster used human versatility to attack multiple weaknesses simultaneously. The tide of war had not just turned, it had become a flood running in the opposite direction. Alliance forces began retaking star systems that had been under Vrak control for years, supported by human ships that could eliminate enemy defenders in minutes rather than months. Planets that had been written off as permanently lost were suddenly sending messages of gratitude for their liberation. Captain Walsh's ship pioneered new tactics for orbital bombardment that could penetrate bioship defensive screens without harming civilian populations on the surface. Her quantum torpedoes could phase through planetary shields and destroy military targets, while leaving everything else untouched. It was precision warfare that Alliance forces had never been able to achieve against adaptive Vrak defenses. The psychological impact on Vrak forces became obvious as their retreat turned into a general collapse. Bioships that had once advanced confidently into Alliance territory now avoided any system where human vessels might be present. The creatures that had seemed unstoppable were learning to fear an enemy whose weapons they could not evolve to resist. Rodriguez reviewed battle reports from across the sector and realized that the war was effectively over. The Vrak might continue fighting for months or even years, but they had lost their decisive advantage and could no longer win strategic victories. Human weapons and tactics had broken their biological superiority permanently. The final battle would take place at the Vrak home system, where over 200 bioships had gathered around their birth world in a desperate attempt to protect the heart of their empire. Intelligence reports indicated that every remaining vessel in the Vrak fleet had been recalled to defend the system that had spawned their species millions of years ago. It was a concentration of enemy forces that should have been impossible for any attacking fleet to overcome. Admiral Thompson commanded the assault from his flagship, the UES Liberty, which had been upgraded with the newest human weapon systems during a brief stop at a mobile supply station. The combined human alliance fleet numbered only 60 vessels, but they carried innovations that made traditional ship counting meaningless. Human military engineers had spent weeks analyzing captured Vrak technology and developing specific countermeasures for every defensive system the bioships possessed. The approach to the Vrak home system revealed the true scale of their civilization. Massive organic structures orbited the planet like living space stations, each one pulsing with bioluminescent patterns that suggested complex thought processes. The bioships themselves were arranged in defensive formations that reminded Rodriguez of antibodies protecting a living organism from infection. It was beautiful in an alien way that made human observers uncomfortable. Captain Blake's expertise in demolition warfare had led to the development of chemical weapons specifically designed to exploit biological vulnerabilities. His ship, the Defiance, carried payloads that could create toxic clouds in the vacuum of space, compounds that would poison bioships faster than their healing systems could purge the contamination. It was warfare that seemed almost unfair against living opponents, but the Vrak had started this conflict and shown no mercy to Alliance civilians. The battle began when Vrak orbital platforms opened fire with weapons that had never been seen before. Streams of living energy that moved like serpents through space, seeking human ships with an intelligence that suggested they were actual creatures rather than technological constructs. The bioenergy weapons could change direction in flight, avoid defensive fire, and seem to learn from each attack they made. Foster coordinated the human response from her tactical center aboard the Liberty. The new Vrak weapons were impressive, but they followed predictable patterns based on biological instincts rather than tactical logic. Human point defense systems had been programmed to exploit those instincts, using false targets and electromagnetic interference to confuse the living weapons until they exhausted their energy reserves. Captain Walsh demonstrated the evolution of human quantum technology with torpedoes that could not only phase through shields, but also split into multiple warheads inside enemy hulls. Single missiles became dozens of smaller explosives that detonated simultaneously throughout Vrak bioships, causing damage that was impossible for organic systems to repair quickly enough to survive. The Vrak fleet responded with tactics that showed how desperately they were fighting. Bioships that had maintained careful formations throughout the war suddenly broke ranks and charged the human lines in what could only be described as berserker attacks. They were sacrificing strategic thinking for pure aggression, hoping that overwhelming force might succeed where careful planning had failed. Rodriguez watched the enemy charge through his view screen and felt something like pity for creatures that had once seemed invincible. The Vrak bioships were beautiful in their own way, organic curves and flowing lines that spoke of millions of years of evolution. They had dominated the galaxy through biological superiority that seemed almost magical to species that built machines instead of growing them. Human weapons cut through the charging bioships like a harvesting machine moving through a field of grain. Railguns fired tungsten projectiles that created massive wounds in organic hulls. Electromagnetic pulse weapons overloaded nervous systems that had evolved to coordinate biological functions, but could not handle artificial electrical surges. Chemical warheads filled space with toxic compounds that killed bioships from the inside out. The battle lasted 3 hours, but the outcome was never in doubt once human tactics began working. Vrak bioships that had terrorized the galaxy for decades were dying faster than they could be replaced. Their organic technology, which had seemed so advanced compared to mechanical alternatives, was proving vulnerable to weapons that operated on principles their biology could not counter. Captain Martinez watched the destruction from her position aboard the diplomatic vessel and found herself thinking about what this victory would mean for the galaxy. Humanity had arrived as a minor species barely worth noticing, but they were leaving this battle as a major power that had saved an entire civilization from extinction. The political implications would take years to fully understand. The Vrak home system's defenses collapsed when their planetary shields failed under bombardment from human orbital weapons. The biotechnology that had protected their world for millennia could not withstand kinetic projectiles that simply punched through organic barriers with enough force to shatter them completely. For the first time in their species' history, the Vrak homeworld was defenseless. The surrender came through communication channels that Alliance forces had never detected before. Deep-frequency transmissions that sounded more like whale songs than any form of technological communication. The meaning was clear even without translation. The Vrak Dominion was requesting terms for ending the war they could no longer win. Thompson accepted the surrender from his command chair aboard the Liberty, making humanity the first species in galactic history to defeat the Vrak through military force. The terms were simple: complete withdrawal from Alliance territory, reparations for damaged worlds and restrictions on their military, expansion that would be enforced by Joint Human Alliance. Patrols. Foster updated her tactical displays one final time and realized that human military doctrine had fundamentally changed how the galaxy thought about warfare. The combination of innovative weapons, flexible tactics, and strategic thinking that emphasized winning rather than looking impressive had proven superior to every form of advanced alien technology. Rodriguez was promoted to admiral and given command of the new Joint Human Alliance defense fleet that would patrol the galaxy and prevent future conflicts like the one they had just ended. The war that had seemed hopeless for the Alliance was over, finished by a species that most aliens had considered barely advanced enough to notice. Captain Blake supervised the cleanup operations that removed dangerous chemical compounds from space around the former battlefield. Human weapons had been devastatingly effective, but they were also precisely controlled. There would be no long-term environmental damage to the Vrak home system, despite the complete military defeat of its defenders. The galaxy had learned that humanity's greatest strength was not their technology or their ships, but their ability to analyze any problem and find innovative solutions that nobody else had considered. They would never be underestimated again.